Hey, it's Andrew Go for Connor's.com, and I have another hand history review video. Um, this one is going to be more of a qualitative video. I'm not going to go into too much math because it's about donk bets and multi-way pots, as you can see maybe from the notepad we have here. So these are spots are difficult to look at mathematically because you have to make a lot of assumptions on how players are going to react to your donk bet, based on what they think about the other players in the pod and what they think about your leading range and stuff like that. So I think the best way to study this mathematically is just to see your own range and see equities of different parts of your leading range versus their continuing range or their overall range, or your overall range against the flop versus their range, and look at it that way, and then you can make better strategies based on your own range. But as far as doing a whole analysis of a hand, I think that's the only part we'd be able to do. And that's stuff you guys can do in your own time. I think I've showed you enough about it in the previous videos. And in general, when you want to lead, it's often because of and the word qualitative, I mean, if you're not English isn't your first language or it doesn't make a lot of sense to you, it's using logic and reasoning, not necessarily math reason. So I'd say like, well, let's look at our document here. I think the best 5 reasons I could think of to donk bet. One would be to isolate a certain player, and what happens is, say for example, we call, say like cutoff opens and cutoff is a reg, button calls, and we call in the big blinds. For example, say like this hand on the replayer here in the background, and say the button's like a weaker player, and we kind of want to get a heads up with him post flop. So we can donk the flop, and that puts cutoff in a really tough spot because he doesn't know what button's going to do. So if he folds his marginal hands, then we have successfully isolated the button player. Whereas if we check, cutoff can better check behind, and then we don't have as much control over the hand. So that's one reason to donk. Another reason would be is because it's an effective bluff. Like if players are going to be overfolding to donk bets, or in general if you have a range advantage, on a board protector, say both ranges for the villains pre-flop are very tight, and the board is 2, 3, 5, and you have completed the big blind when you're calling with like 70-80% of hands, for example, then you're gonna hit that range more than them, and they'll have to fold a lot. And also too, if you have really good blockers, say on that board specifically, 2, 3, 5 rainbow, if we had 4, 4, 6, 6 in our hand, then it becomes a really good donk and 3-barrel spot. Another reason is to protect your hand. I think most people do this or have thought about this in the past. Like for example, if you have top set and the board's queen jack 5 double suited on the flop, and you want protection now, that's a great it's a great spot to do it. And I'm sure a lot of people have done it in the past, like I said. Another reason is to get value. Because if you lead like really strong hands, it could be deceptive, and some players might speed verse you. So if they think you never lead a strong hand, or if you've led a hand in the past that was kind of weak and went to showdown, they might have assumptions about your leading range, which isn't true, because they didn't see you lead a strong hand and they don't believe you this time. And the last reason I could think of is because leading's a better option than check calling, check raising, or check folding, like all your checking options. So if all your options are kind of bad, but leading, is maybe the best of worst evils, then that would be a reason there. And I think I should have an example of all of these in this video, maybe not the last one, but I'll try to like weigh my options as the video goes on and see if that comes up. So I have about 20 hands marked. If I can get through all 20, that's great. If I only get through 5 or 6, that means we were really in depth in a lot of hands, which would be cool too. So the way I found these hands at Hold'em Manager 2 I'm a really big fan of filters. Um, so this one is if you want to find these spots where like you were in donk bets. I couldn't find I couldn't find like donk bet equals true for some reason, even though I have that in my HUD. Like for example, like the 7% here, like donk bet, I couldn't find like donk bet equals true. Otherwise, it'd be really easy to do. So what I had to do was put in about 6 filters here. So our 6 parameters. So the first one is hero soft flop equals true, flop bet equals true, PFR equals false because we're leading. The player's on flop is greater than 2, so this is a multi-way spot. You could just put greater than 1 if you want heads up pots as well, or like less than 3 if you want heads up pots specifically. The pre-flop action, I can't spell, is you're facing raisers and callers, and then single raisers, so it wouldn't be like limp pots, or you could do limp pots if you wanted to, but or like you're not facing a 3-bet right away off the bat. And here's positions. I did all these out of the blinds, small blind and big blind. I would assume that's where most of the leading spots come from anyway. But yes, that's the filter for this, and let's get into the hands. Okay, so the first hand I picked is pretty interesting. The button makes it just over 2x. It's 2.25. Small blind flats, and we decided to call. I think we're defending or completing very wide here, and this hand is a very standard call, being double suited. The button's opening 86% of buttons, and small blind is calling 9% versus steal, and 3-betting 9% versus steal from the small blind. So he's has a pretty tight range here, which is going to make this flop play a little dicey. So this is a board texture. It's checked to us. This is a board texture in which I think hits a small blind's range more than anyone's because this range is so tight pre-flop. Like he's going to have a lot of like just high card hands and decently connected and suited hands. So I think he has the strongest range on this board, although I could be proved wrong easily, since and as well as like button and our ranges are very wide here. I think we both have about 80% of hands here. So I decided to lead here because I didn't want to give a free card to anyone, and I think the button will check back here a lot. It's a board where like people's c-betting range is kind of they don't see bet a high frequency on this board. So there's a lot of hands you want to check back, like a bear queen or bear overpair, even a lot of bear flush draws, stuff like that. So by no means you need to bet this. Especially heads up, but especially multi-way, I think people are c betting really tight. And I didn't want to check call it either because it can get really dicey on turns. So I wanted to protect my hands, maybe fold out some hands with equity and just kind of take initiative. So I decided to lead somewhat larger here because I don't think you have to go full pot or anything, but definitely something like 3/4 because you want to get value and protection. I mean, it's just no real reason, especially on a draw heavy board, to bet larger for any reason. So villain calls, and I think he'd raise a lot of his sets here. So I think I usually have the best hand when he calls. He'll have queen jack sometimes, but we usually find out about that on later streets. Aside from that, he has a lot of just draw hands, maybe like queen x, like a queen plus a flush draw, or a queen plus a straight draw, something like that. And they don't really have to be super strong. I mean, they have equity versus our range, but again, he opened 80% of hands or more, so there could be like queen plus 7 high flush draw, stuff like that. On the turns, really good for us. It's obviously like the biggest blank we could find, and I'm betting big now for protection. And again, if I had maybe like ace 10 of spades or something like that I was leading, I would bet again very large to get forward equity. He calls again, and I made a huge mistake here and checked. And it's a huge mistake because villains can have a lot of bluff catchers if you call twice. And he's not going to like bluff himself either because it looks like a spot where I'm check calling usually. So I think I should just go for value here and bet quite large. I can bet really large depending on how wide I'm leading. The more bluffs I have here, the larger I should size it. So I think betting something like 60 or 50 could be fine. I could be leading aces here, so I'd want to bet for thin value to get value from kings or queen jack even. So I could bet like half pot or a little bit more. I don't think villain has us beat ever. I don't think he has many 2x either. So yeah, I think it's just a really easy bet, and I missed it. I must have leveled myself into something, and he had one of those weak queen kind of hands that had a lot of equity, but we got value on flop and turn, and potentially could have on river. There's no incentive for him to turn his hand into a bluff on river. So in this next hand, the middle position opens 2.5, and he's raising first in about 20% from middle position, so pretty standard, like tight and good. Button flats. Button is, what's his call open? 29% the button, so he's defending his buttons kind of wide, but he's kind of tight in general, so it's not getting too out of line. We overcall. I think I would overcall in general unless the big blind was a maniac or just squeezing a lot, but he's not, and he's actually over my small sample on him. Somewhat loose passive, so I wanted him in the hand as well. So I decided to lead here. I would say the 9 is a nut out because we block Jack 10. The 4 is a nut out, and we can barrel 10s and jacks as well. Possibly even 6s and 7s if we want to, because I think if we get called, it's usually be like by 2 pair or something. It's just kind of dicey here. I think 4-way to lead. Kind of cringing when I saw this in my database, but I wanted to add it to this anyway, to this replayer. Yeah, I think good things can come, and I don't really like check calling too much, although you can check call and lead a lot of turns. That's actually a pretty good line. Like if you check call and lead like an 8, you have blockers on to Jack 10 and stuff like that. But as it stands, I did lead. Got 2 players to fold and book called on the button. So I think his range for calling the flop, I think he in particular might raise some sets here, like pocket queens, pocket 8s if he had them. So I'm assuming he's going to have a lot of like queen plus gutter or queen 8 or queen 5 or 8-5 or something like that. I think his ace is a really good scare card. And because people don't really lead here too wide, I think I can go ahead and barrel and get lots of fold equity. I think it's just better than check folding or check calling. Like, it's not a really good option, and it works out. On to the next hand. Under the gun opens full pot, small blind calls, and we have a decently connected hand with a king high suit to call pre-flop. Pretty standard. We flop top 2 as check to us, and I decided to lead 2/3 pot. One thing is kind of contradictory here is that because the under the gun players should hit this board a lot, so we shouldn't have much of a leading range here. Plus, he's c-betting 88% so far over a small sample. So I think we can probably get in a check raise here, but I was worried about not being able to. Actually, I really don't know what I was thinking at the time, but sometimes people will bet here and then not bet turns. I really wanted to get 2 streets of value with his hand before the board changes too much on the river. So I just decided to lead here in case he wanted to check back here. I mean, we can get 2 streets of value from aces and king X a lot of the time. Like I think almost all king X calls here. Especially these players, I wouldn't call them recreational, but I don't have a lot of hands with them, and their VPIPs are close to 50, so they could be on the looser side of things. Do get called from under the gun. Turn's really good. He's not going to have a ton of king 7 in his range. I think mostly he has like king with Broadway cards or aces here. His pre-flop raise percentage was 18% overall. I don't think it's worth looking at the raise first in stats pot position because it's just so small of a sample. So definitely leading this turn again for value, and I made it a sizing which I think he'll call with all king X again. That's the hands I want to keep in. I'm not really worried about protection. I just want to get value from his top pair hands. He calls again, and on the river, I think in the first hand of this video I made a pretty huge mistake. I checked here thinking he's going to turn some hands to a bluff, but if you think about it, his King X hands don't need to bluff here. There weren't. I thought maybe, I think I remember playing this hand like I wanted to like 6-8 miss, so I wanted to give him a chance to bluff, but I blocked 6-8, and 6-8 isn't a huge part of anyone's calling range on the flop either. So it's not like someone's going to call with 97-6 there to float. I mean, they could, but it's kind of risky. So I should be betting here to get value from 2-pair. A set if he had it. I shouldn't face the nut flush draw too much, although it's a possibility. And I wanted to, and there's, I mean, some straights, he'll have some straights sometimes. I don't block all the straights, and you could have called the flop with 3-4 as well. So with him not having much of a reason to bluff here, and with us, having a lot of hands we can get value from, I think I missed a pretty clear bet here. And he checked behind with 9-9-3-4. I didn't expect he was opening that wide, but and he was calling kind of wide on the turn. So I guess that's a factor of maybe him being sort of recreational and us too getting action when we lead. So who knows, he would have bet that on the flop, and he probably would have checked back to the turn. So we didn't get as much value as we wanted to, and we could have bet the river too. So with us leading, we could have got a lot of value out of this hand by betting all 3 streets. In this hand, we were getting tremendous odds, 7-1 on such a weak cam, but it's 7-1. So I just completed here. Cutoff is opening, I mean, it's kind of loose side, 48-18 over small sample. Button's kind of tight, and small blind is a reg. This is at 100 zoom, if I had to guess. Or no, there's not 6 players, so it's just 100 regular tables. Check to me, and I flop a set on a board in which I think, I'm not sure if villains, I'm not sure it's going to be getting c-bet here too much. And I guess I could check raise, and check raising and check calling are fine options. So it's not really a matter of which option's the best out of all those. It's just or like what's the best of like 3 or 4 bad options, because they're all like pretty good. Like I say, they're all equally good. So I decided to lead here to get value from flush draws and value from ace-x. I think most flush draws and ace-x are calling here. So I do lead about almost 3/4 pot. Maybe it was exactly 3/4 pot without the rake. I don't think the turn changes too much. Players don't really have a whole lot of 4-5 in their range. Yeah, I just think he's mostly weighted towards flush draws and top pair kind of hands here. And bet again, trying to get value. And he folds pretty standard hand, but again, you should be leading some strong hands. This next hand is a good example of, if you recall, one of the reasons for us to lead is to squeeze out a player and isolate a certain player. And actually, the example I used earlier in the video, it totally applies here. So cutoff opens, cutoff's a reg, button is a weaker player playing about 42-9, and we complete. Definitely no reason to 3-bet. We don't push any value pre-flop, and we want to keep the button in the hand. So we flop the second nuts with a redraw to the nuts if we hit a queen, and we have an ace of diamonds blocker, so we could barrel diamonds if we want to. And I think it's a board in which cutoff is going to c-bet at a low frequency. There's only like probably pretty good hands, despite him c-betting 83% over the sample I have on him. And I also just want to get him to fold any kind of hands and just keep the button in the hand, as well as start getting value now and protecting my hand a little bit. So we do get him to fold, which is great. Button calls. Turn is a little awkward. It's hard to say whether this player would flat queen 10 on the flop. His aggression factor is low, and I know a lot of players would flat queen 10 here. Not because it's a good spot to do it, because probably leading a somewhat blended range that might barrel a turn a lot, so they're trapping, but also because they're just, scared of the redraw and just want to like see a free turn or see a turn and, wait to put more money in. So I think he's going to have a lot of 2-pair here, bare flush draws, and possibly the jack high straight as well. So I want to put in a bet here to protect my hand a little bit, and to stay uncapped and, get a little bit of value as well. So I didn't go super big, so I want to keep a lot of those hands in. Maybe you could have like 10-6 or 6-5 somehow. I can always, I think 14's pretty good in the 23. He calls, and river's somewhat awkward. I think we just have a really good bluff catching hand with the ace of diamonds. We could also bet like $10 or so to try to get calls from straights. I think that would be fine as well. But as played, I decided to bluff catch to see maybe if he would turn like a set or 2-pair into a bluff. He bets like half pot, so I followed through with my bluff catch, and he had a weakish hand. I guess his flop call is okay. Turn call, I can see it because he has a gutter, there's a sucker gutter and 2-pair. But that's one of the reasons of leading. You get value from hands like this. So, and he correctly valued on the river. I think his sizing was actually really good on the river because we were really incentivized to call with our straights. This next hand is a hand in which we have lots of options. Preflop's not one of them. I think only calling here is good because if we 3-bet, we're going to squeeze out the button who's playing 71-20, and small blind is playing really tight. It's kind of interesting because he does not have a 3-bet range from the small blind so far, over almost 500 hands, but he's calling about 29%, so he's calling a little loosely, and we call. Check to us. He has somewhat of a donk bet range here, but I don't know if it's on this board texture or what, but he's donk betting 10% overall, so maybe some hands are taken out of his checking range here, or out of his range here since he checked. And I think we have a really good lead spot because, it doesn't hurt us too much if it gets checked back, but his hand can just bet now, and it can bet for value in lots of turns of rivers. It can bet for protection on the 2s and 3s, and a little bit of value, like on blank turns. It can deceptively, we can like check call turns if we need to, like if it's a 7 turn or a jack turn, we can check call. There's just lots of, it adds a lot of balance, I think, having the enough flush draw here, because we can get value from other flush draws, and if we want to lead 10-9 here and sets and stuff, it gives us protection on other board runouts that aren't blanks. So I do like leading here. I didn't want villain to check this board back. I think it's one of those boards where people aren't betting at a high frequency, but I'm not sure. A recreational player might just be betting whatever here, just because he doesn't know better or she doesn't know better. So villain calls, small blind folds, which I think is pretty good. On the turn, I think the only play here is to check call. We can maybe bet small for value, but I think we don't have too much to protect from aside from, open enders now. If he has like queen 10-7, something like that, and we beat most other hands, so I think it's going for the check call standard. And on the river, since he didn't bet, I don't think he has too many straights. He doesn't have a set too often, so I think we can bet for some pretty thin value here. I think we can even bet like $8 or $10 or something like that. Yeah, I did go for 10. I think I like that sizing. And he does not oblige when he folds. And this next hand, under the gun opens. I think the same villain from last hand, or was it? I don't know. In the cutoff calls, we complete in the small blind because this is 100 PLO, and we're almost 200 big blinds deep with both players. We're 200 big blinds deep with the under the gun player, so these are bad aces to 3-bet, so we just call. And we flop effectively the nuts. We can call this the nuts if we want to. And I think it's just a really good spot here to lead 3 streets. We can start with checks to protect our other flushes in our range. I don't think we should lead the nut flush here all the time. because we do have a lot of hands we want to check all, like straights and sets and stuff. So we want to, have it when the board remains the same throughout the river, like the board doesn't change too much. So, in any case, I do decide to lead. I didn't lead super big because I want people to call with two pair and straights and stuff, and obviously all other flushes. And I think the under the gun player, he's raised versus 19%. He's going to have a lot of flushes here. So, as far as balancing my range, I guess I'll lead with some ace of spades here, but I don't know if I have too many ace of spades blockers in my hands calling from the small blind. I don't think most people do in general either. So, I might be slightly disbalanced here into having too many flushes. But if I want to include some blockers, I could include maybe the king of spades and queen of spade blockers as well. And also, I guess you could lead the king eye flush here too. So definitely polarized. There's no question about it. Bet again on the turn, and then bet big on the river after being called. Just hoping he has a flush. I mean, he does somewhat of a cooler, but it's definitely a spot where you can be leading, as opposed to check calling and getting max value that way. Like had I, check call the flop, maybe he doesn't c-bet the turn and I only get value on the river, or maybe he doesn't c-bet the flop at all. Maybe he just checks and I only get 2 streets. So I made sure I got 3 streets here. In this next hand, we call an open from middle position, who's opening quite tight. So 3-betting this is certainly out of the question. And big blind comes along. And we have a hand that has a fair amount of equity, I think, versus a lot of parts of villains, like our opponents' ranges. I think I said that correctly, opponents' ranges. And it doesn't really play good as a check call, unless you want to, it's kind of sophisticated to check call here and check raise turns, although it's okay. And we also don't want to check fold either, because we kind of have the backdoor flush draw, the nut gutter, the overpair, bottom pair, all kinds of stuff. Actually, we could draw to the 9 as well. So I decided, given all that, I decided to lead here because we have a really good double barrel hand. It's like we block queen 9 and king queen and stuff like that. So on lots of different turns we can continue. Barreling, we can barrel on hearts, we can barrel on blanks. I don't think I barrel on a board pair, like Jack 10 rings. I think that's going to improve a lot of the hands that call here. And yeah, so I do lead. My standard sizing, I guess. Big blind calls. I don't really know how wide his range here is pre-flop, so I can't really gauge into how many too many bare flush draws and stuff he has here. Turns a blank, and we're gonna bet 3 streets if we can. Basically, the only thing stopping us is the board pairing, and maybe when the flush comes in, but maybe with the queen of spades we can bet that as well. This would be a really good leading hand if we had the ace of spades somehow, but it's also fine having the backdoor flush draw, and he folds. And we'll make this the last hand, I think. I think we got through 8 or 9 hands, so that's pretty good. An unknown player to me opens middle position. He's playing 48-24 over 25 hands. This is at 100 zoom, so I assume he's somewhat recreational, although who knows. This player's been in a lot of our hands so far, playing 63% of hands. Calls on the button. We have a pretty easy call from the small blind. I don't think 3-betting is an option with the hand this week. I'd probably consider 3-betting it if it was suited to the ace, but it's going to play fine here. And we don't have to worry about the big blind because he is not squeezing very wide at all. Actually, he hasn't 3-bet yet or 4-bet at all, and he's just playing quite tight, so he's going to fold a lot pre-flop, which he does. Despite getting tremendous odds there. He's getting 5-1, so he should be calling pretty wide there. Now, this is a board, actually, maybe my actual range here, because they're both potentially weaker players, I might be calling a bit wider. But I think in general, I almost have a range advantage here. If you think that middle position's opening maybe 25% of hands and button's calling like 60% of hands, and I'm calling, 15% of hands or so maybe, but they're like very high card weighted, so I think I almost have a range advantage on this board texture. So given that, I go ahead and lead here because I'll have a lot of like top set, middle set, and top two pair combos, and the hand plays, pretty well. My actual hand plays pretty well for our range, balancing out. So we have coverage on different turn cards that bring straights and stuff. The pre-flop razor calls and button folds. We turn a flush draw, and since we don't really have any showdown value, the best play here is just to bet. If we had some kind of special read, we could check raise, but I don't think it's a really good idea versus player who has a low aggression factor so far, and who knows, you might just be trapping on the flop as well. And we can call a raise too, obviously. But villain calls. And in the river, we hit our flush. And I think the play here, given that villain's probably going to have a lot of two-pair combos and possibly some straights, I don't think too many lower flushes, is to bet small here and probably fold if we get raised versus an unknown, unfortunately. But I think the play here is to bet small and try to get value. And we do a little less than 1/3 pot and get called by a hand that actually had really good equity versus us on all three streets. Actually, let's go ahead and see the equity here. So in the flop, we had 31%, which is pretty good for a semi-bluffing hand. The turn, we improved to 35% because of the flush draw. So yeah, it's really nice to be able to barrel with hands that have equity here, and it's also obviously pretty nice to make a hand on the river when the villain has like the perfect bluff catching hand with the king of hearts in his hand. Like, we're not going to have too many flushes here, I don't think. And we could have potentially like, ace queen jack here, and ace king jack we're turning into a bluff now because we think we're beat, stuff like that. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you guys learned a bit about donk betting, and I think we covered all of these topics here. We isolated players in these hands. The effective bluffing hands, there was one with the ace queen queen 8 protecting our hands. I remember like the bottom set on that one board. To get value, definitely the one hand with king 5 where I missed the value bet on the river, and because leading is a better option, I think there's a hand with that as well. So if you have any questions about this filter or any these spots or leading in general, if you have questions about leading in heads up pots, definitely leave your comments or questions in the comment section, and I'll respond to them as soon as I can. This has been Andrew Go for Cunners.com. Thanks a lot.